Good morning, everyone. I'm Meet the Changeling. I got a couple complaints last time that my videos aren't too visually interesting. Fair enough. It's not 2006 anymore, and people do seem to want motion graphics in the tutorials, so I've decided to put something a little more interesting on screen for you. Without further ado, let's get into this episode because it's gonna take a while. Nah, just kidding. We're going the other direction in time. Today we're blocking in our canvas. In painting, blocking in is the process of laying down the general colors and shapes without having to worry about the fine details. I'm gonna put a clip of blocking in on screen now so you can get the idea. Shout out to J. Lee Painting for that clip. Hope you don't mind using it as a visual metaphor. Link below if you want to check out their painting. So, here's our canvas. And it's time to make these elements work with one another. It's not too difficult of a process, and just a quick aside, as you can see from this little spreadsheet I have over here, I've gone ahead and done some additions to what I've had last time. Refinement is the whole name of this game. There's more stuff added over time, and even some stuff subtracted sometimes before you put anything out in public. So here's our canvas, and it's time to make these elements work with one another. And choose how we're going to express them to support our themes. This is very creative work, and creativity is hard. If you went to school in a Western country, particularly the US, you were subjected to a process designed to induce conformist behavior, suppress creativity, and transform you into a productive factory worker. Yes, even if you were going to school in 2021. The core idea behind the process has not changed, even though we're no longer a manufacturing-based economy. Even if you think you've escaped this process unscathed and have your creativity intact, you don't. Everyone got a little screwed over by school in this area, and that's like the best case scenario. Some people just got completely fucked. So what can we do about this? Well, you can learn to be creative. Creativity is innate to humans. It's what makes us better than most other animals. Yeah, chimps can build tools too, but they don't innovate. They don't look at a tool and think, how can this be better? And then, make a better termite picking stick. Humans do. Deep down in your mind, there's creativity. Repressed, waiting to be embraced and used. You don't need to be smart to be creative either. All you have to do is cross a line that's been put down by society. A line that most don't dare cross. You may not be conscious of this, or perhaps you don't personally experience it, but for many people, creativity is scary. But why? Well, it's because of the box. The phrase, think outside the box, isn't just some buzzword phrase for business jerks. It's a very clever metaphor. The box is society's rules and constraints. This is what makes the box valuable. The box is all of the known and practiced things that make everything function. It makes everything we do tick along. The box contains everything good we've ever invented. The box contains every social norm, every rule, every safety procedure, and every existent object. The box isn't something you should think without frequently. You don't want to be thinking without the box when a cop has stopped you to write you a speeding ticket. You want to be in the box for that. Thinking outside the box is liable to get you in more trouble. The same goes for if you work as a power plant engineer. Thinking outside the box with safety protocols to try and squeeze a bit more power out of the turbine, that could easily cause a disaster. And socially speaking, oh man, you better believe the box is good too. It's what's supposed to keep people from being disrespectful cunt waffles to each other at all times. It's also what keeps people from generally going about raiding each other's homes for supplies like bandits or Vikings. So the box, it's indeed good. But all creativity lies outside of the box. It's just peppered amongst all the discarded bad ideas which we've had over the years and haven't put into the box. If you want to have a novel thought, if you want to think of something unique, it must come from outside the box. Everyone steps outside the box sometimes, just usually never in public. You're home alone, you step outside the box, and you sit down on the couch to watch that one show that you love but get called stupid for liking. This is because the dark secret of the box is that you are outside the box. The you, the real you, all your thoughts, all of your emotions and your feelings, outside the box. Everyone is outside of the box. The concept of a public mask is the box we are talking about here. And in order to be creative, you have to take off that mask in a place where people will see what you're like without your social mask in place. To many, this is horrifying. But don't worry, it's okay. What almost everyone forgets is that we as a species have given a pass to our storytellers to take off their masks in order to entertain us. You're allowed to be yourself and put yourself on the page and scream. It's okay. The box says so. The box gets bored too. The box wants novel experiences just as much as you do. The box would love to receive a novel experience from you. Of course, the box is also a fragmented mess. It's nowhere as neat and orderly as we like to pretend, but that's okay. Just know that whatever you do, some people will hate it, some people will love it, and most will think nothing of it. Yet, even if they hate it, even if they think that your creation is terrible steaming garbage, they won't hate you for making it. At least adults won't. Children will. See, adults only hate you if it turns out that you wrote a book that's morally offensive to push your own morally offensive viewpoints. Adults hate people and their work separately, until those two things are irrevocably interconnected by the creator. For example, let's say that you decided that you wanted to write a book about rape, but not about rape as a bad thing, about rape and how people should be doing more of it because it's fantastic. That's what makes adults hate you. But if you just write a book that has a character get raped in it, that's not inherently bad. Society might give it a pass. And if you do it where this is honestly a major turning point for that character, it's something that drives everything else about them, something their entire being changes about. In other words, you treat it as it really is in real life, just the opposite will happen. They'll love you for that. But until you do something, until you interconnect something morally abhorrent with your work in a way that makes it political, adults will not think less of you for trying to be creative and tell a story. Only children do, and you shouldn't be afraid of children. Seriously, though, it's a pact that's existed at the base of society with storytellers, and that pact is you are free to be yourself within creative mediums. You may be yourself to bring us joy, to teach us a lesson you believe we need to hear, and to express your feelings within these creative spaces. So don't be afraid. Instead, be yourself. Pull yourself up out of the pit and embrace the world as it is. It's time to be creative. It's easy. Anyone can do it. Just don't be afraid. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that leads to total oblivion for your soul. So, how easy is it to just sit down and be creative anyways? Well, that depends on what you're trying to create, of course. It's one thing to come up with a t-shirt design. It's another thing to come up with the machine that weaves that t-shirt with the design in it. For a lot of things, you have to be an expert in them to be creative. Fortunately, you're an expert in storytelling, and you may not even realize it. You've been immersed in stories and storytelling since you were a child. Every TV show, every book, every video game, they were both entertainment and teaching. You know what works and what doesn't work to make a story good, even if you don't know the why behind those things. Did you watch the last season of Game of Thrones? If so, you probably think it was terrible. You probably even have some ideas about what made it terrible. Guess what? That's creativity. Hey, this isn't good is the first part of creativity at the very least. The second part of creativity is having the courage to say, I think it would have been good if X, Y, Z. Your heart and your mind will tell you how things should be in those situations due to the sheer body of works that you have absorbed over your time being alive. Listen to them. Let those ideas pass through your unique experiences and the way you see the world. Whatever comes out on the other side of that process, that's creativity. Now, if you just sat down and rewrote the last season of Game of Thrones to make it better, well, that's called fan fiction, and that's creative work. But it's not original work. It's a modification of someone else's work. There's no shame in that. In fact, there's a huge audience for it. It's also great practice in a much less judgmental environment than original fiction. Go write a few fanfics if you feel the need for some practice before jumping into the arena. What's more, though, the process of reusing and remixing old ideas to create new ones is quite literally the foundation of storytelling, and it always has been. It's not ripping something off if you use the old as the starting point, and you truly build off of that old concept while modifying it to fit your needs. No, really, that's okay. You know who did that? J.R.R. Tolkien. Yeah, he did. He ripped a lot of his base ideas right from Norse mythology and German folklore. A ring that turns you invisible but corrupts the soul? Right from Norse mythology. Know who else did that? George Lucas. A little more well-known, but most of Star Wars was inspired by some old Japanese movies about samurai and an old movie about World War II called Dam Busters. Creativity doesn't exist in a vacuum. Culture does not exist in a vacuum. What came before must be used to make what comes next. Absolutely no one has ever had a totally original thought, ever. It's always been based on something. The first caveman to tell a story, he based that story off of whatever the hell he saw around him happening in the real world. And the next people to tell a story, they base things off the same, and also what that guy told as the first story. That is the process. That is storytelling, and it is okay. But what do you do when you want to come up with something completely from scratch? Well, that's pretty easy too. What's the story you'd like to hear? Just answer that question. And it's okay if the answer to the question is something like, well, He-Man, but an urban fantasy story set in modern Seattle. Start from any old place, literally anything. The key is to then think about what things exist in that story and would make it special to you. Come up with a page or so describing it. Put that page down for a while and come back to it later. Is it really any good? If it is, think about how you could make it even better, and how it could be more your own than someone else's. Is it not any better? Well, why not? What would make it better? Think about that instead. Hammer out what would make it better, then, regardless of which one you did, regardless of yes or no, step away again. Loop that a few times. 3 or 4 should do. And after that, you should have something unique, something creative, something all your own to build on and share with others. Now, we did that last time. We were making use of pre-made components produced by Western culture over thousands of years, filtered by the lens of me, a person from America on the fringes of American mainstream culture. Now it's time to show you what I did to take those few words on a page and refine them all into unique ideas. You see, all creativity is that same simple process. You just change target every time. Last time, our target was what basic elements would make a universe I would like to explore. This time, the target is how can I use those elements to make something that this would make this universe a more interesting place to me. So let's take a look at what I did. This spreadsheet shows the elements I decided to add and elements I decided to make work in other places. It's broken down pretty simply with a little distribution chart here. We got all the setting supporting elements in one nice little column, and all of the theme supporting elements in their own columns, the ones that support myth versus fact, good versus evil, adventure, and individuality versus community. Now, yellow entries here, those are ones that actually work in more than one category. Those are powerful. Those can build up a lot of things at once, and you'll want to play into those. Just sit down and think about which ones can do that. Green are ones that I added, which are just kind of interesting to me, like the idea of power crystals and silver actually having mystic powers. It plays well with more science-y based magic systems. And then we got the blue ones here. Also ones that I've just added, but unlike the green ones, which are actually stuff that are more narrative based, the blue ones are a little bit more world building based. They're more things that can exist as lore rather than things that exist as, storytelling stuff, the narrative things. And if you're wondering why these are green when those really sound like the later category blue, it's because these could actually be both. No organization system will really be perfect for this. You just gotta do something that makes sense to you personally. And following this general outline I'm doing and the way I'm doing it, just take care of that. But for your own internal formatting, for what reminds you about what is X and Y, do what makes sense to you. And now, of course, here is our setting canvas. It looks a little different than it was last time. It's been made much, much, much longer. And that's because I sat down and I did what you should be doing if you're following along. I came up with all of the reasons why I wanted to use those themes and those elements and wrote those down. And then I went one layer deeper and wrote down why I want to use them. Right? So the why of the why. So let's just go through here. First off, setting name, it's been replaced with Medea. Why Medea? Well, we'll get there. Now, fantasy. I want to do fantasy for the purposes of exploring people as individuals and providing escapism for the sake of providing a source of stress relief for the readers. Why is there no why for that? Well, it doesn't really need to be a why for the why on that one. If you want to put that down, you can. That's more for your primer and your paints. Now, texturing. I want to tell this story to adults. Why? For the purposes of enjoying building a universe where the small details are appreciated by the audience, and due to the major need for adults to have something to just chill out with. See? I tied that into what came before. I tied the texture into the material. That's what you're doing this whole time. Now let's get to the real big meat of this. Myth versus fact. Last time I picked myth versus fact to get to play with the interactions of reality and belief. And I did pick that because there's this idea. Only X is true. The universe must contain X. And that is demonstrably false in real life. Playing with mythological and scientific facts to blend them or twist them is also personally entertaining to me, and I hope that readers who read this should come to realize that reality is what it is, and not what we want it to be. Reality cares for no man's faith nor reason. And in the themes of myth versus fact, here's what we got in this universe. Godlike entities exist, but consider mortals to be akin to insects. Now, I've always found it super weird that people think that all-powerful beings would give a fuck about what mortals do. It's rather egocentric of us. It's not like most of us give a shit about what the ants under our houses do until they do something that directly impacts our house. Now, for this little universe specifically, it's the post-apocalyptic remains of a section of these godlike beings' home dimension, with the Big Bang having been a huge disaster that permanently destroyed / is destroying / has destroying their universe all at once. Time works differently there. But see, many of them are actually trapped within the explosion, i.e. within our universe. They therefore don't really care about or are usually objects of worship, and some major cosmic disasters are the results of the conflicts these godlike beings have with each other to survive. Now, very rarely, some are vain or compassionate enough to interact with mortals, and those ones do serve as gods, but they're going to be rare. There'll be also mystical sites in this universe, and many of them are places or objects that they created to benefit themselves. These godlike beings also have physical forms, but these forms don't contain their minds. They're avatars, projections. These avatars do not appear to be mortals at all, especially when they usually appear as colossal forms made from a patch of the void, a nebula, or a star field. They all have this kind of ethereal cosmicness to them. Or maybe some have some ethereal earthiness to them. A giant walking beast made of trees, or some vague outline of a human woman seemingly made of outer space just standing in the planetary atmosphere. That's the kind of stuff we're going for here. Now, magic. Magic is real, but it isn't remotely as mystical as people believe. Now, that's because magic is a cool concept, but it's stupidly OP in most forms, and no one ever describes it as, well, a thing that exists. See, things that exist are therefore real by definition, and real things are measurable, testable, and repeatable. So in this universe, magic is simply a fifth fundamental force governing reality. Magic is the interactions between the universe and the space it is expanding into. This naturally produces many different effects because fundamental forces produce many different effects. It's just how they do. So one of the things this fifth force does is it actually defines the laws of physics themselves. Now, magic's laws are counter to many of the laws of physics which govern the majority of space and time, allowing for many exploits otherwise impossible to be possible. But its laws are knowable, understandable, testable, and repeatable, though not fully understood by people, of course. But that's a function of time, not a function of any bullshit mysticalness. In short, Magic is the science relating to the workings of a whole nother layer of reality. Now, spells. There's going to be spells. Spells are actually large, complicated things requiring the creation of objects in normal space with certain properties, using certain tools, and they function as a machine. See, if you wish to throw a fireball at your enemies, you have to construct this arcane apparatus somewhere, which serves to instruct reality to give you the ability to throw fireballs, and if that machine is damaged or destroyed, spell's broken. This exception to reality is gone, no more fireballs for you. Of course, we're playing with myth versus reality here, so it's not fair for all of the mystical stuff to get yes, but science has to get some too. We gotta be fair, right? So, science was completely wrong about time. See, our understanding of physics is very incomplete as it stands right now, and many of our big explanations for the universe could easily be toppled or at least shown to be partially wrong by some future discovery. And yet a lot of people put religious levels of faith into these theories. Science-based faith needs to be shaken to bits. Science is about fact, not faith. The conquest of nature is to be achieved by number and measure, not insistence and stories. Now, first off, relativity in this universe, it only applies to slower than light matter and energy systems. Second off, there are actually way more systems of matter and energy. Systems include slower than light, luminal, and faster than light. Each of these systems is discrete, with its matter and energy having unique forms and properties. Now, matter and energy comes in forms which can exist in one of those systems, but not in others. Not at the same time, at least. Now, you can see some luminal system mechanics from the slower than light light systems, but none of the faster than light systems from that slower than light system, and vice versa. So, the idea there being, we can see like neutrinos and photons and all this stuff at the bottom tier of the middle category, which is light speed stuff. We can't see anything past that. Likewise, stuff that's faster than light, they can see the top of light speed, like, I don't know, tachyons or other fundamental particles that are theoretical in nature. They can see those, but they can't see the photon. They can't see the neutrino. They also can't, neither of us can see the middle of this. And if something happened to exist in this luminal space of time frame, it wouldn't be able to see just the top and bottom of the other systems respectively. It's just all about what slice of the universe your energy and matter is attuned to. Now, classical mechanics, that's all slower than luminal stuff. If you know science, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, that's everything you see around you. Now, luminal systems, those work expressly at the speed of light and nothing else. Superluminal physics, that governs all matter and energy moving faster than light. And this is all really about something called causal links, which are the scientific term for mathematically verifiable links of cause and effect. And that's big, high-tier science stuff. You can go look it up on your own time. It's not too important. For the context of this universe, all you need to know is that slower-than-light systems can only experience causality from events that occur at slower-than-light speeds. Consequently, they experience the illusory force of time in one direction, then that direction is forwards, i.e., cause must precede the effect. Now, luminal systems, they experience no time at all, i.e., a cause cannot have an effect. There is only the effect, and it was set in motion by the creation of the universe, and nothing else will affect it ever. It just is, and it will always be. Now we got superluminal systems, and that's everything that is only able to experience causal links at a speed faster than light. And in addition to experiencing time forwards, the effect that this causes is that they can experience time backwards. In other words, the effect can be caused, or the effect can be the cause. And if that's really confusing to you, it should be, because that's completely contrary to everything about the world in which you live. And that's fine, because this here is being used to help scientifically solidify our faster-than-light systems. We'll get to those later. Now, the appreciable effect of this is that tachyons and other faster-than-light particles and energy, they all exist, and they're the basic building blocks of an entire other phase of matter and energy, and we see the effects of the universe had by these faster-than-light systems as dark matter and dark energy. Now, the matter and energy that they form, they can be interacted with by translating the objects, people, and places between these causal systems. And that's how FTL works here in this universe. Hyperspace is the majority of our universe that we can neither see nor touch by normal means, but can translate into to gain more speed than otherwise possible. That's just pure sci-fi. Let's have some fantasy, because this is a science fantasy, remember? So there are people, places, and things in hyperspace, and you can visit them while you're traveling at FTL speeds. Now, these superluminal systems, they don't have any FTL equivalent, but they actually don't need one. They can simply just take back the time they spent traveling on arrival, which means that they have the ability to teleport by erasing the causal links between departing and arriving without moving the change in location. Now, in-universe, scientists will understand how that works. It cannot be replicated in subluminal systems at all. And anyone who hasn't spent a lifetime studying it, that may as well be magic, because that there is pure fantasy bullshit. I don't think there's anything that can substantiate that whatsoever in real-life science. But that's fine. We're not writing science fiction. And even if we're not writing hard science fiction. We're writing science fantasy. We're allowed to have a little magic. We're allowed to have a little bit of the fantastic and the different. It's the whole point. Now we come to the theme of good versus evil. And I chose to do good versus evil to illustrate a rather poignant opinion on tribalism. The long and short of the matter is I believe adults are too quick to label entire groups as if the group is one entity. The actions of groups as a whole has very little to do with the nature of people within them. Acting in groups changes people, and this needs to be more commonly known and understood. So to explore that theme and the reasons I have behind that theme, good and evil are actual things that exist once people create them in a given time and place. It's important to remind adults that while good and evil are just concepts we make up to approve or condemn certain behaviors, the reason we approve or condemn behaviors in the first place is that by focusing on others more than ourselves, we bootstrapped our species out of being eaten by lions in the savannah. That sucked ass for everyone. Good and evil were not real until we made them real. It's also important to remind people that why someone does something matters, and usually it matters a lot more than what they're doing specifically. So in the context of this universe, Medea, good and evil don't exist as matter or energy, or even within the universe itself. Rather, they exist in the space that the universe expands into, the realm of those higher dimensional beings, and they exist as actual physical forces there. Now, the use of magic over time has drawn in enough moral energy to make those laws function within our universe, so long as there is enough good or evil being done within a given area, or with a particular object, or by a certain individual. And once existent, the alignment of the person, place, or thing has tangible effects on the reality around it. Now, the effect of this is such that the reason why you do what you do is more important than the doing it. Feeding orphans to be seen as kind and thus socially valued is a selfish act as well as a lie, and will result in the potential development of an evil aura. Only by doing it because you believe it is right, or because you are sorry for the fate of the orphans, or another selfless reason, will result in the development of a good aura. Consequently, magic-rich worlds have actual morality police. Because being a dick to be seen as good, or just lying to people, that kind of thing, has a tangible effect on everything. You, by being an evil bastard and a selfish jerk, you are literally making life worse for other people around you. The evil is saturating these places and influencing others to be more selfish, more aggressive, more heedless of other people's well-being. But how would this ever work? How would you have evil if it's obvious when some place is being tainted by evil? And the specific nature of that taint we can come up with as we get to our next step. But how does evil do that? How is it not just identified and kicked out? Well, you see, evil is charismatic and self-confident. It's social and generally unintentional. Evil is never really evil for evil's sake. It is evil for the sake of a specific thing. Over time, enough acts of evil add up and can permanently taint a place, object, or people with unrepentant greed, selfishness, and disregard. But even in these instances, good still exists within those places, just suppressed and typically powerless to change anything. And a cool way to play at this is for powers and abilities that are seen as good to often be wielded by evil people to win them over onto its side. And consequently, powers and abilities often seen as evil can be wielded by the good to make up the power difference between good and evil. Now, there's one thing I like to subvert here. It's a very popular Disney trope, and that is good looks good, bad looks bad. So for this universe, the prettier something it is, the more likely it is to be evil. Evil is seductive by nature. Evil is self-interest combined with a lack of empathy. It cannot sustain itself without convincing others to support it. Correlated, the uglier things are, the more likely they are to just be normal. Not good, normal. See, good isn't normal. Good is a state that has to be focused on and maintained and is an active process. Because you see, evil thrives, ebbs, and renews all on its own. Good often comes from evil existing. The two mix and intermingle, like oil, vinegar. Good needs allies. Good never succeeds on its own. Good requires like-minded people working as one. And that's why evil people always rise once more. Good is actually reactionary, not proactive. Now sure, proactive good individuals exist, but they're an exception to the rule. They can almost never get the social momentum necessary to preemptively take measures to ward off evil happening. As a real-life example, pretty much nobody is okay with Big Pharma jacking up the price of insulin, right? Everyone would like that to not be a thing. And there are people, a good chunk of people, who really, really wish that politics would actually be the answer and place some kind of law limits on how much they can raise these drug prices that people actually need to not just drop the fuck dead. And they have all kinds of reasons for why they want that. We're not going to get into, we're not going to the politics, but those people, they exist. There's a lot of them. Some of them even have money. But is there a law? No. Because not enough people support that cause. Not enough people are actively being the force of good to push back the evil that has arisen there. So it's never going to happen. Not until enough good people come into play. And that kind of thing, I want that to be an ongoing theme in this universe. Evil, on the other hand, evil is a response to threats to survival, be they real or perceived. And as a result, evil behavior can be present in entire groups, be they cultures, species, or organizations. So long as that group's survival depends on acting in their own self-interest, or this is the only method they know to survive, the group will remain evil. Given enough environmental pressure and time, it's possible that in this species could evolve with no capacity for altruism at all. Now, that makes it highly unlikely such a species, if they were sapient, could ever develop as a civilization. You may not believe this, but it's absolutely true, and you can Google it, you can look it up. Our species, humans, we're instinctively kind, we're instinctually helpful. The vast majority of us. We work as teams, we work as groups, and the reason behind that is altruism. It's actually in our own best interest. The better off you can make others around you, the more likely they are to help you, and that's not just directly. Like, let's say you're a billionaire, right? Like a proper billionaire. You have billions and billions of dollars. You could make yourself way more rich by investing in the education and development of poorer places in the world. And it's not making you rich in that sense of, oh, well, family and nobility is more wealth than money can ever give you. No. You can make bank. You can make tons of bank, because the more people we have who are smart and educated and understand science and technology and engineering, the more science and technology and engineering gets done. More charity is more power. Now, for the purposes of this universe, I just have this little note here. You can do these kind of things or do this kind of stuff, and how about one particular space empire with primitive shock troopers drawn from a death world who are objectively horrible and evil? No technology of their own, they never were able to develop it because they couldn't get along well enough, but they sure do make for great things to give a chainsword to and point in a general direction and say, kill everything you see over there and we give you more meat. Always a fun thing to see for the evil empire. Not that I'm doing an evil empire, I'm just going to be doing Shades of Grey. It's people who are good or evil, not governments. Now, for the theme of adventure, it's there to provide escapism. Plain and simple. Adventure is classic escapism. It's a way to feel like you've been places and seen things that you can't otherwise go to. It's also a great way to examine the nature of characters, and it presents many different types of conflicts that you can't get in with other types of stories. So in addition to the apocalypse, which the eldritch entities and the cosmic forces out there have, in this universe there's a precursor race, and one which colonized the galaxy. They vanished. These precursors were humans. You see, I personally find humans in fiction to be boring and mundane. I'm a human. You're a human. Everyone I've ever known, humans. They're kind of the normal, the default. And sure, that means we understand humans really well, but haven't you ever wanted to just, not deal with people? Or humans, more specifically? I'm sure you have at some point. Variety is the spice of life, so they say, so sometimes I think you need a universe that doesn't include humans. Now, you see, there's also a more poignant reason for that. I also think it's important to make people see non-human characters as people, just like you and me. Do you want to combat racism? I bet you do. See, well, getting people to see incredibly inhuman appearances is, oh hey, a person. That's a good way to help with racism. That is a good way to help the next generation not see differences in appearance as being so big and important. We want people to judge others based on their actions, not their looks. This is one way you can help. So for this universe, human civilization reached the Kardov 3 level of development. Or is that Karshov? I'm never sure. K3 is the abbreviation. So that's when the theoretical point at which a civilization would be capable of fully utilizing the entire motherfucking galaxy's energy for their own needs. All of it. 100%. Hard concept to grasp and understand, but it's pretty common in science fiction and also the discussion of our species' future in space. So here, humans got there. We made it, baby. Now, many of a human's relics, they still exist and are used by modern civilizations, especially if they can't be reverse engineered. There's just one of these things. Most of these ruins, they're power plants or megastructures that tend to serve as homes or nature reserves. The more fancy things are much more rare. Fancy things include war machines, terraforming technology, astroneering equipment, that kind of stuff. There's also plenty of artifacts of doom, the things that are just horrible events to pop up. Weapons of mass destruction or, other gadgets and gizmos that are not understood, and because they're not understood, they're exceptionally dangerous, like a von Neumann probe. If you don't know what you're doing with a von Neumann probe, that thing can just completely disassemble the planet you're standing on to make more of itself, to spread out, disassemble more planets to make more of itself, so on and so forth. So, humans' apocalypse, that came in the form of a real event projected to occur in the future, the Andromeda Milky Way collision. Yes, galaxies can collide. That's a thing that happens. So, humans, 4.5 billion years of civilization. Pretty damn good run. That's what we had. What ended us humans is referred to as the dawn of magic. It wasn't the collision itself. So in real life, even, all signs indicate that the future merger and collision of those two galaxies there, perfectly safe, pretty much a non-event, except for the fact that the galaxies will pass through each other, maybe 10 or 12 stars hitting, literally, maybe 10 or 12, and then pass through, slingshot back and forth a bit, and eventually merge to a new a new ecliptical disk-type galaxy is what will be born from this future collision. But that's not what happened in this universe. What happened is the dawn of magic. So the tidal forces of these two galaxies colliding on the layer of subspace, that layer between the universe once expanding to, that caused magical storms to erupt all across the galaxy. The laws of physics themselves broke down in some places, and space travel became impossible in most of the galaxy. Entire planets fell out of space-time itself. Humanity's critical supply lines shattered, the K3 infrastructure disintegrated, and since nothing was self-sufficient anymore, why would it be? Seriously, why would it ever be when you have basically instant travel between the stars? It's better to make all your stuff at one place and ship it out. It's called, scaling economies. So anyways, because of that, humanity fell. Now, some human groups survived, of course, using slower-than-light ships and stasis pods to ride out the storm and head for other stars. And They seeded many worlds, and a few of their colonies made it. So evolution, natural and artificial, resulted in each of those human-descended groups diverging from baseline humans by quite a bit. If baseline humans still existed, they couldn't have children with these survivors. That's to make them officially scientifically different species, because that's just how evolution works, baby. You put some creatures in an environment, they shape the environment, and the environment also shapes them right back. Over enough time, they become so different, they can't have kids anymore. That's literally all evolution is. So this merger of the two galaxies of the Andromeda and the Milky Way, it occurred way faster than predicted due to a lack of arcane knowledge. See, the Milky Way alone, it lacked a strong arcane field, preventing more than tangential knowledge of the arcane from being discovered by humans. So rather than taking 2 billion years for the merger to be completed, it was over in less than 300 from the moment of contact. Now, this epoch, turning point for other species. Arcane energy levels never returned to a pre-warp collision point. Sorry, pre-warp. A pre-collision point, which allowed for many of the species that evolved in the days after this cataclysm to have natural magical capabilities, because now magic's part of the environment. Now magic is shaping some things in some places. Just another evolutionary pressure. So little information on the precursors, that is humanity, is known to the living peoples of the galaxy. But their name for the galaxy is known, and it's generally used as the name for the galaxy by most cultures in honor of these fallen giants, and that name is Medea. See, a long time in the future, from our perspective, a long time in the past from their perspective. The eventual resulting merged galaxy was named in a contest, and the winner chose to continue the tradition of Greco-Roman names for celestial structures, the ones that humans used in the 20th century. The ones that gave us Neptune, Uranus, Mars, Venus, and even Pluto. Even though Pluto's no longer a planet, it still counts. It's an ice ball. It's a little part of the Oort cloud, just like the asteroid belt. Big-ass, round asteroid. So space objects, we name them after Greco-Roman things in this time and place. This future person, they wanted to continue that tradition because they felt it was classy. Unlike the current modern naming conventions of an acronym that is a silly or cool word. A little cultural note, Medea, she was the wife of Jason from Jason and the Argonauts, and was actually a powerful enchantress. She's in many ways narratively comparable to the character Andromeda, for which the Andromeda Galaxy is named. But Medea had just a bit more to her in terms of character. In other words, she was actually developed as a character that had characterization. And she also advances the plot of both stories she's in several times. She's the main character and driving force of the second one. So Medea is pretty much just Andromeda, but bigger and better and more developed in every way. Hence, the name choice for this new merged galaxy. Because after the merger, the galaxy that resulted was bigger and better and more developed in every way. See? A little parody. Good name. That's the kind of thought you should put into stuff when naming things in your fiction. Just as an FYI. Now, out there floating around the universe, there's some old human colony worlds and megastructures which are inactive, but they contain ancient robots, and these function a lot like traditional fantasy undead when these places are explored. Some of these robots are actually classifiable as undead, as fragments of the now dead human residents of these places have, through hook and crook, seeped into these automatons over time, and thus some of them have magical properties. Not all, but some, and I've made some notes here for just ideas of what I can do with this concept. You can have cyber necro-zombies, and polter AGIs, and mechano phantoms. A little bit of silly of a concept, but if you play that straight, you can do some serious horror with it. Like, the names may be silly, but how the things that the names represent are used that makes or breaks these concepts, and we'll get there when we get there. Now, sometimes waking up these ancient human creations, it's nothing but bad, particularly when their maintenance bots and entire civilizations to strip mine worlds to rebuild Dyson structures. But also sometimes waking them up is good. They'll assist their new organic friends to the best of their abilities. And also sometimes nothing happens, really. It's just they're awake now. Because you gotta have all three options available. Our last theme here, well, we got individuality versus community. I don't really have any particular reason for wanting to do it, just thought it was neat. Just something I personally find interesting in cultures and how they act with each other and with themselves. This theme is supported with most cosmic style events with eldritch things are due to the small tribes of eldritch things fighting with each other, or fighting over potential recruits. Most international conflicts, those are going to be caused due to Nation A favoring individual rights, while Nation B favors collective rights, and their interactions will have bred resentment over time. And many human descended colony worlds, those will be... Blah. Sorry, just give me a sec. I need to take a bit of a drink here. Talking a long while, and my throat's been dry all day. Got to 110 earlier. Much better. Okay. So many of the human descended colony worlds, those enforce a singular culture in order to keep their perceived notions of humanity alive. In other words, whatever culture they have is maintained, and it's a twisted view of one or more human cultures, real or fictional. So it's generally believed by these people that they have a duty to preserve their ancestors' ways as an example of other species because of how high humanity got back when it was large and in charge of the galaxy, right? So this whole thing, in and of itself, it's a religion, taken stupid seriously by worlds that practice it. And of course, exceptions exist for individuals who are of tremendous value to civilization in some way or another. They might get to be a little eccentric and act a bit how they want, but everything falls within a certain range. And that, by the way, my friends, that is how you do Planet of Hats, and have it built into your world in a way that's actually interesting to read about. Kind of cool. Last note on individuality versus community. Local communities, generational gaps, those are generally due to shifting values of individual rights versus community rights, with the youth generally swinging opposite of their elders. And this is just kind of true to real life. The longer people in a place have been conservative, the more likely teen rebellion will eventually push it into being a little bit more liberal than it is. And if it's a more liberal place, the more likely that, the youth will be pushing for more conservative things. And that's just kind of how life be. People's views change over time, of course, and it's just this general ebb and flow of no individual rights, no collective rights, no individual rights, no collective rights, and people change their minds and opinions as they age one way or the other, many times, actually. It's just how life is, but putting this out in fiction will make your world feel a lot more real, especially when you bake it in right to the world building. So we get to our paints now. And if you don't remember the analogy, this is all of our genre-based stuff, right? So this is all the stuff I'm picking out for this universe, which will support our genre and make sure our work falls into that category, but only in the ways we want it to. So, first off the bat, melee combat comeback. You don't want to blow holes in your own spaceship, you see, or even a ship you're boarding. Even if you're in an EVA suit, explosive decompressions are dangerous, and you'll want to avoid that. So swords have made a comeback, but only short swords and other stabbing-oriented blades. And see, things too long to use in close quarters that you can't really see easily being swung inside without cutting a gash in a ceiling, they're just not going to use those. They're just not. It's just like urban combat in real life today. Long rifles? No. Bullpups. Gotta make use of doorways and getting in and out of vehicles all the time. It's gotta be compact, but still usable. Same principle. So even on planets, melee combat is frequently used to help minimize collateral damage, because if it's being used in space for that reason, you're arming all your troopers with melee tools anyways, you might as well make sure they're using them elsewhere and get your money's worth, right? So urban military operations, police actions, bounty hunters, they'll all employ melee weapons first, if the situation prevents. Now, body armor? Body armor is directly correlated to the prevalence of melee tools. Ranged weapons, they're just stupidly powerful even today, to the point where body armor isn't really worth it. You'd have to wear so goddamn much to be protected adequately that your average human can't do it. Not without that armor being powered armor or supported by an exoskeleton, which, yeah, we're working on and have actually seen some decent success with in the last few years, where there is existing power armor, but it's hardly widespread or even in real proper use by anyone. But in a world like this, where melee combat's a thing again, regular old body armor people wear, yeah, back in vogue. See, melee weapons? Consequently, they will have to have evolved to defeat body armor, so while blades are popular, picks, hammers, and maces will be much more popular, because that's what defeats armor, not swords. Now, this holds true for almost all the starfaring races. Few species don't care about the dangers of ranged weapons in space. Perhaps they're vacuum natives, or perhaps they have armored carapaces, and therefore they don't use melee tools. But no race entirely forgoes ranged combat, because That would just be stupid. Very tactically stupid. You could forego melee combat and get away with it, but not ranged. Next up, how do people get around the space that they're stabbing each other in swords with while people shoot guns unadvisedly? Well, they sail the Sea of the Stars because ship metaphors for spacecraft are cool, but why not go literal? See, a while back I had this neat idea for a light sail-inspired FTL system that rides along on tachyons, much like the sailing ships of old ride on wind. I used it in a fanfic once, and the audience loved the idea, and I see absolutely no reason to not reuse that idea here. So, tachyons exist and can be interacted with via the use of a very specific electromagnetic field frequency in the form of field. I should stick to my notes a little bit better, I'm sorry. So these fields, they're projected from a ship forming sails. Well, the tachyons push against and move those sails, which in turn move the ships, just like an ancient sailing ship. So the ships are sailing around space on tachyon winds, which make it either easier or harder or faster or slower to get to a specific place at a specific time from a specific place at a specific time. Now, tachyons, they're best described as the photons of dark matter stars, but they behave a little differently due to being superluminal matter. They push objects in not only space, but also time. The amount that they push through time is proportional to the speed they lose pushing the object through space. The mathematical ratio of this anti-time dilation factors out such that using a tachyon wind to push your vessel to FTL speeds will make the trip occur instantaneously once the object reaches sea. But that instant transport, that's only from outside the vessel's perspective. Aboard the vessel, it can spend days or even weeks traveling at faster than light speeds. But from the outside viewer's perspective, the ship jumps to warp, and then the moment it jumps to warp, it also jumps out of warp at its destination. So this is me playing with the real-life concept of time dilation from relativity a little bit, making it so that it's more practical for spacers to experience it. So instead of a trip taking, a week for them, but hundreds of years have passed in the outside world, now no time passes in the outside world, and they're just like a week older or so. I personally find that way more fascinating and interesting. Also, I am a little sick and tired of hearing everyone, fanboying over Einstein and his theories, so personally I'd find it nice if he was just a tiny bit wrong about one little thing. I mean, he probably isn't, but you know how it is. You keep hearing people repeating the same thing over and over and over and hyping it, and you don't really care for it, you kind of wish they could take it down a peg. This is that, but in the context of a fictional universe. So, it takes hours, days, or sometimes weeks of acceleration to reach FTL in the system, too. That's to let spaceships have their whole chases as a ship is trying to get away. There's now time for a chase sequence and a little bit of a running battle to happen. Lets your universe have some more excitement in it. But the speed at which it takes a ship to get up to FTL, that's mostly based on the shape of the sail they use or the specific type of sail that ship is using. The ship's power plant factors into this too. It takes a lot of reactor fuel to maintain a ship's star sails. Consequently, starships exist and most people have a personal ship, but people who travel for things other than work, they're either very rich or do something to make money each stop they make. And this whole system also makes planets somewhat analogous to islands in old school fantasy stories, with bigger planets that are more important can be somewhat analogous to continents. So that's just kind of how the reader is going to interpret all this stuff, which means you'll have to put in a little bit of effort to avoid the one biome world problem where people are like, but you can't have a planet that's all jungle. You actually totally could, but it'd have to have very specific conditions. But in generally speaking, that's just a note to remind me to make sure that when I use these worlds, I make mention of multiple biomes on each given planet, just so it's a little more believable and a little less weird and off to some people, which unfortunately are most people. Now, our next thing to make this a cool science fantasy universe, there's a space internet, the Odin Network. I ripped that from the same fanfic. It's also my original creation. I personally find it a very nifty idea for something precursors could have left behind for people who would follow them. Just the internet with auto-translation systems. So one of the leftover human relics is a massive FTL network system, which is surprisingly enough, totally open and self-maintaining. Anyone can use it. Absolutely anyone. Freely, too. It's one of the checkboxes for first contact in this universe, whether or not your planet is spoken to by the galactic community. It's discovering and accessing this internet. So the system's tachyon-based, so messages arrive the moment they're sent. Travel time is simply ignored from our perspective. Press send, they see your message immediately. Pretty bitchin'. No lag, no ping. So one of the primary reasons alien species can get along with each other in this universe, well, that's because of this internet. They've spent generations talking to each other as equal and friends with online interactions. They've watched aliens just be live streamers playing video games or showing off their job or making vlogs. It's a community of the entire goddamn galaxy. So, another note here, translator implants, well, they work by tapping into Odin. And, the real-time, the real-time, this network will translate whatever language you're hearing via the implant in your head, and using its super-duper computer, just beam back the translation to you. Consequently, I need a way better name for super-duper computers. Super squared computer, maximum over computer. What is the stage beyond a supercomputer? As long as it's not ultra computer, because that just sounds like a shitty off-brand of something. So, magic. You gotta have magic in science fantasy. Well, you don't, but you kinda do, mostly because it's cool. Magic spices up a story, and even Shrek has the Q, and it's also psionic powers, so why not go a bit further than that and get some Star Wars vibes? Deal with a dash of old-school Conan wizardry thrown in there too, Personally, I feel magic ought to be a fantastical science. Any other way of using magic makes the story fail, in my opinion. Even in a kid's show, magic shouldn't just do whatever, or whatever the writer pleases either. Magic should have rules. Real things have rules. You can have magic. It just should be believable to the reader. They should be able to understand when magic is an asset, when magic is a threat, and what is happening when people who manipulate magic are doing magical things. In that respect, for this universe, magic is just like technology. Magic requires a spell for each and everything a magic user wants to do, unless that magic is naturally occurring and they themselves are thus the machine for it. So a wizard, they'll create a physical object following arcane sciences. This object, it's called a spell. The spell is a sort of altar which serves as a link between the universe and the realm beyond. The wizard and/or designated spellcasters can then cast the spell to invoke its effects. If the spell is broken, its magic is lost, and the magic it granted cannot be cast. The more powerful a spell is, the more elaborate and large its physical form must be. A simple charm to improve body odor could appear as, a small necklace or a ring. A spell that allows people to conjure fireballs might be the size of a desk lamp. A spell that allows the caster to transform their physical form into another animal might be the size of a desk. A spell that powers a starship might be the size of a building. So, the distance between a spell and its caster, when the caster wants to use it, irrelevant. Doesn't matter. As such, wizards, they tend to hide their spells within layered layers in the remotest places in the universe to prevent their magics from being unwoven by interlopers. Now, some technology in this universe uses magic. It's referred to as magitech, or enchantment. Usually a company will have an enormous spell hidden away in some facility, which permits their magically infused products to function as described. They're often sabotaged by rivals, because no shit. Now, not all advanced technology incorporates magic, and magic-based technology isn't inherently better or worse either. It's usually a sidewards movement into another field, like a laser pistol enchanted to remain in its holster unless intentionally drawn by the owner. That kind of a thing, right? Nice things to have, but not essential. Now, some magic, it uses technology. This is referred to as technogic, or technomancy. This is usually when a bit of tech is used to hack a spell and grant its benefits to an unintended recipient. There's other things it's done too, but that's the most common one. So magic, it's not fully understood, but what is understood about it is scientifically understood. Because if you can do something, it can be studied. Magic could never be mystical if it were real. It would be analyzed, cataloged, understood, then exploited, because that's just what thinking beings do to real things they can interact with. Next up, spacers. Spaces are a culture, because cultures pop up in everything. People who work in space would 127% be a whole nother culture, unique from all the various worlds that they have previously inhabited. And that's because spaces are people who just make their living in space, traveling between systems. They're often mercenaries or pirates, or sometimes just rogues. Occasionally they're bounty hunters or mobile mechanics, and other such people, right? Now, there are many designs of spaceships, not quite one per civilization, but close. That's because most designs appeal to many people regardless of species and culture. There's only so many aesthetics. So but what's important about that in cultures? There are galaxy-spanning subcultures based entirely around aspects of starship use, design, and construction. This is because, there's a car guy. You know a guy who really loves the 1910 Mustang, right? There's no reason to think people wouldn't feel the same about spacecraft once they're a thing. In fact, spacecraft are a thing already. They're not interstellar, but they're still spacecraft, and there are absolutely space shuttle fanboys. There are absolutely Falcon Heavy fanboys. They exist, and so, because it's a thing you see in real life, it's a great thing to include in a universe that you're building. Now, many people in this universe, they prefer to live in space rather than on planets, just a personal choice. Plenty of people live aboard their starship, treating it like an apartment, and use shuttlecraft to get to work. Lots of people also live aboard habitation stations of many kinds. There'll be ring worlds and space stations and O'Neill cylinders and Dyson swarms. That's not quite enough to make cultures, right? They gotta have their myths and legends, so some ships, they're legends. Some are active, or at least their names are active. And they're known to most spacers, even most people. They're regarded as mythical titans of bygone eras. There's also inactive ships, lost ships, your ghost ships. They're known by everybody as spooky events and legends that popped up over time, that kind of a thing. Same goes for, space stations and even planets and locations. So a little note here, many stations are infamous for being a specific merc or pirate hangout job. Those become meccas for imitators. Because, of course, if you knew what bar back in the day that, say, Blackbeard hung out in, you'd probably hang out in the same place, give yourself some credibility by association. Spacers also have their own traditions, which are practiced between them. They have their own holidays, superstitions, traditions, and a trust-based honor system, and this will later be expanded out to a general culture write-up, but we're not doing that right now. We're doing the general broad brushstrokes. We're blocking it. Next up, big theme I like, the precursors were lonely. A lot of works like Halo, the precursors were trying to survive, or the precursors were greedy, or the precursors were too curious. Stuff like that, right? In this instance, I want to go with the precursors were lonely, because the precursors were humans, and humans have always wondered if we were alone in the universe. Well, it turns out we were, and we couldn't handle that. So humanity devoted itself to seeding the galaxy with life and setting up entire systems meant to make a galactic community not only possible for the friends they would create, but awesome for the friends they would create. That is what I see humans doing. And if you do not think that it's possible for humans to do that, well, this is billions of years in our future, and we survived that whole time. Wouldn't need billions of years. We would just need 10,000 more good years of the scientific. So, most of the structure that the humans created for these purposes of giving a great universe to everyone they would create, they're all long gone, but several key things remain. There are designer star systems. Humans seem to enjoy setting up blatantly unnatural star systems to create highly specific biomes just to give species they set on the evolutionary path to sentience a really cool and unique home. Because that'd be a fun hobby for godlike humans to do. I absolutely guarantee you that if you're sitting here doing world building for this, you'd probably love actually really building a world, wouldn't you? Yeah, I would. And of course the next one, the Orion Deep Space Interstellar Network, or ODIN. We've mentioned this before, it's that massive FTL network that's literally just an internet. It's easily accessible with radio waves, but intended for use with quantum subspace excitation transceivers. That's another thing I invented a long time ago, which we'll get to in your time. So, the effect of Odin, it lets everyone talk to everyone. Just period. Races learn that they are not alone in the universe in a few decades of developing radios capable of transmitting a signal outside their star system. Kindness, great boon. Next up, we have the Transgalactic Interstellar Terminal System, or TITS. Because of course humans would name something TITS. They'd also name something butts, but I couldn't think of something with them when making this video. Rest assured, it's out there, because you know humans. You're a human. We'd do it. Now, the Transgalactic Interstellar Terminal System is a series of wormholes with a shared internal pathway that rapidly permits the free movement of ships between certain hub systems. It greatly diminishes travel times because it's just a giant frickin' subway for the entire galaxy. Yep, subway system. In space, using wormholes. Why? Because it's cool. Next up, the Maw power stations, also created for humans, or by humans, as well as for others. They're a series of rotating black holes which have been converted into massive dynamos via ring structures. These stations beam power to any compatible receivers within 300 light years of them, and thus provide free energy to thousands upon thousands of worlds. Next up, this is a special little creation of mine, again from that same fanfic I've recycled a few ideas from. Gamacitiae organelle, better known as the bonds of friendship. It is a double membrane-bound organelle, just like mitochondria, and is found in nearly all organisms. This organelle augments your immune system, specifically at the cellular level, their specific host cell. And this augmentation renders organisms in which these little symbiotic life forms reside so that they to be completely immune to diseases originating from other worlds. The practical upshot of this is it allows people to simply go to other planets and interact with one another without the risk of spreading disease, starting plagues, or other risks from alien contact. Without this, you could not have, or something like it, you could not have a world that works like Star Trek, where you just beam down to the alien planet and say hi to the locals. And but science fantasy, you can't do that. Boring, that's what it is. Or it becomes science fiction, hard science fiction, which is great, but then the rest of your tropes have to change to support that too. So it needs something like this. You could just hand wave it, but it's cooler to make mention of it. And have something that makes sense as well. So the Macite's DNA sequence, I don't know how you pronounce it because it's Latin. No one knows how you pronounce Latin, really. At least I don't believe so. We have ideas, but no, nothing official. The Osintamite, its DNA sequence, also contains a little packet of coded information which has not yet been decoded, but is almost certainly a short message of some kind. Why? Well, because then I can make a joke in the universe at some point, maybe, where someone decodes it. And, of course, someone working on decoding that message would be wondering why humans would have done this. Why would they have coded a message into the very DNA of all their creations? What could it possibly be? What could be so important? Why would they encode this? And then the message is, yeah, so, humor. Next up, the sixth and final major thing humans did for their creations, dogs. Every planet has doggos. All of them, 100%. If habitable, there are doggos. Literally everyone can have a dog if they want one. Everyone. Moving on to weapons. Railguns. In this universe, they're going to be high damage, close range tools of death, cheap to use and cheap to fire. Missiles, they're mid range, they seek stuff, generally fired in swarms, expensive. Lasers, low damage, long range, but free. Lasers take time to do damage in real life after all, so they wouldn't do too much damage very quickly. And lasers are also not instant, they're just light speed, So after a few AUs, you can dodge a laser. It does take time for them to move. They're quick on short scales, not on long scales. Plasma, though. Popular science fiction thing. It's in this universe, too. High damage, close range, cheap. Plasma, it likes to decohere and cool down over time. Also, probably never going to be accurate because of just the nature of plasma. And you also need gas to turn into a plasma. So unlike most energy weapons, its ammo is just not energy. So it has a cost to it. Not free, but cheap. Next up, another option not seen too often, particle beams. Star Wars actually uses particle beams. George Lucas is very free with his use of the word laser. Now, particle beams, we have them in real life right now. Usually only in particle colliders and a couple other very high energy science tools. These things as weapons, high damage, long range, goddamn near instantaneous, at least in the light scale ranges. Power expensive though. Now, the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, a particle collider we're using for science currently, as it is, it could probably cut a Star Destroyer in half in like a few minutes if we could fire it like a gun. They're actually stupidly powerful. Like, stupidly powerful. And hitting something with one would probably make it undergo a small nuclear explosion. And if you're wondering how the LHC hasn't exploded like that, that's a good question. I know it hasn't, and I know there must consequently be, some kind of thing preventing it, but I am not a nuclear physicist, nor engineer, or any other person who would be working on that, so I don't know. That's what the internet's for. I'll probably Google later. Maybe you can too. Next up, magic weapons. They work as wildcards. Why? Well, there's no reason ships themselves couldn't cast Fireball. Maybe you just have magic augmenting weapons, maybe you have specific spells that are weapons in and of themselves, but that's where the fun in ship design will come from in this setting. So that's everything we have, all of our basics laid out in our canvas. It's all blocked in now to form a setting Bible. Next time, we'll go ahead and start at the next layer, which will be taking this basic Bible and building our settings history from the ground up so that we can have a logical starting thing. Now, we do have some of the basics blocked in for our history right here and right now, and I'll go over them real quick. We have this universe begins. It's the apocalypse for some other civilization or race, so, well, we'll have to start with their thing. And then we have human history, and then we have galactic history. So that's 3 phases of history to do the next phase with. We want that general story all done and written up so that we can base everything else off of one common shared timeline. That is what we'll be doing next time. I'm Meet the Changeling, and I'm out.